Boys, you will not believe the mess that I've put myself in. I already went through this entire Google document and all the points and everything, like hyper energy, super excited, like super psyched out, like a nincompoop and all of that. My audio sounds horrible and it would actually kill your ears. So I had to redo all of it, but it's fine. It's fine. Today's video topic is what I learned about being right. Basically, we're just going to talk about the idea of being right versus actually learning and what happens if we become someone who wants to be right every single time. Or, to be more honest, you guys are going to basically listen to me talk about what happened in my life when I was becoming this kind of person. Before we criticize this kind of person, we need to understand, we need to get into their head and actually reason with them and figure out why they are the way that they are, which is why we focus on the positives and the appeal of being right all the time. Let me just write that in. And when we think about being right all the time, one big thing we have to think about is that being right all the time genuinely feels good. Now, there's no real way to dance around it. One thing I'll say, have you ever been at a quiz night? Or have you ever just done like a competition like Kahoot? And like they rank the leaderboards as whoever gets the most questions right? And if you've ever won a game of Kahoot or any game of like a quiz where you compete with other people and you get the most points, that feels electric. It's almost like playing Rocket League and scoring a winner in overtime to rank up to like champ 1 or something. Not like I'm speaking from experience. I think on a deeper level, like when we look into real life, the reason why being right feels good is because it proves that we're someone who has knowledge over something and that we've taken the step in the right direction. Because to be right, you need to be knowledgeable on something. You need to have studied. You need to have basically done something in this topic or domain that no one else has done. So it feels good. And if we do it repeatedly and over again, we might even start calling ourselves someone who's decently knowledgeable and someone who is expected to hold a lot of knowledge. But also, being right helps us build a good image for ourselves. Emphasis on good image. Because now we can see ourselves as the type of person who is always correct. Like whenever, like for me, for example, and a real world example of this was when I was in my economics class in high school. And my teacher would always just pause during lessons to ask questions about the topic she was teaching to make sure we were actually paying attention. So I would be the type of person who would just raise their hand, and 95% of the time, like I would get the answer to a question correct. And as this kept happening, I started building an image of myself within my own head to be like, hey, Mental Chats knows what he's talking about in economics. Like he knows these things. He is always right, like 95% of the time. This is a positive. This is an appeal of being right, because one big thing about having a good image in this sense is that a good image is a great source of confidence. So we can be confident in ourselves in the idea that we always get things right 95% of the time. And I don't know about you guys, but I know that for me, at that age as well, I was really in need of a source of confidence, and I greatly valued being able to be confident because I couldn't really find other sources of confidence. Count how many times I say confidence, right? But the point is, it was just a good place for me to just build some self-esteem, and always being right felt like the path of least resistance at the time. And I argued to myself, like, hey, being right all the time is also a bit beneficial. Not consciously, like subconsciously, I'm assuming. That being right increases our chances of success in big parts of the world. One of those big parts being in the academic sense. Because if we followed like a simple trail of logic, saying that if we tend to be right when we practice and or when we study for a subject, then there's a high likelihood that we're going to get increased chances of doing really well in an exam or a test for that subject. Like an example that I usually bring up was that in mathematics, right, we would get homework and the homework would have 40 questions. And if I did the homework and out of the 40 questions I got 39 of them correct or all 40 correct, I now have proof to say, even though I'm not going to scream it on the rooftops, I have proof to say that I'm reasonably good at math if I was able to go through all of this and get all of them correct. And that helps to build on that good image that we're building for ourselves, and that good image we're building for ourselves that instills confidence and that makes being right genuinely feel good. But now that we understand the mentality of someone who wants to be right all the time, well, the mentality of a person, I don't know how valid it is. I also should have just said this earlier, guys, take what I say with a grain of salt. Remember, I'm just someone who's speaking on the internet. I didn't do research on this thing, but I do promise that eventually there is going to be a video where I'm going to put in a lot of research and time and effort. So if you're excited for that, please do like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you guys can see that video and criticize it. But now we're back here. We're going to talk about the consequences of right maxing. We're going to look at the person we've built here with 3 points, and now we're going to destroy him. Now, the first big problem with always trying to be right is that you do build an identity that does instill confidence and that is sounding like an identity that's built on a good foundation of that, like, hey, you're a knowledgeable person. But the problem is this identity is built on a very fragile foundation, because all it takes for everything to fall apart is for you to just have one conversation on like a random Wednesday afternoon during recess. But in South Africa we call it break, but during recess or break, right? Where someone tells you, hey, you know that thing that we've been talking about the past 2 days and the points that you've made, I have reason to believe why one of your points are wrong. It really just takes that, just a moment, right? Just a moment of someone saying, hey, you're wrong, and then they reasonably prove why you're wrong. It's gonna hit you like a truck. And you have two options, or I had two options. I either just had to take the being wrong like a man, or like a high school boy, and just humble myself and be like, hey, yeah, good point. Or I just did what was the most likely outcome, and I just argued back, even though I was completely wrong. And the reason why we argue back is because, or the reason why I argued back is because, remember, being right was part of my identity. Always being right is a part of my identity. My identity is where I was getting confidence. This was my primary source of confidence. So now that was under attack, and I valued confidence. So when you realize, or like what I realized, was that when I had this identity and I built it up on this, there was just a pretty fragile foundation for me to have that kind of identity on. Because like I said, it really just takes one person saying, hey, about this thing, like you're wrong. And it doesn't even have to be a person. One real example was that when I was in grade 11, at that point I was like top 3, top 2 in economics in my entire grade. But then in grade 11, I got a lot of questions wrong. I underperformed. I went from getting like an 80%, 85% average in the previous year to the first term of the new year getting a 64. And that hit like a truck. I have my reasons as to why I got the 64 and why I fell off from 85 to 64. And even at the end of the year, I ended up rising up back to a 90. I have my reasons. But the point is, we went from that idea, this image of, wow, I'm always going to be right in economics. You know, I'm getting these 95s, the 85s, to all the way down to a 64. And now it hit me like a truck. I was low-key depressed. Not depressed, but it hurt. And I had to sit with that and deal with that. Like that was an emotionally wrecking moment. And I needed to do some self-reflection. I realized that as well, which leads into the next point, that in the long, thinking that you're always going to be right and trying to write max just makes academic progression slow. Because now that you have the identity that you're the type of person who always gets things right, the moment you want to start doing practice for tests and exams, you invite a risk that your identity does not want to see. And it's the risk that you could actually get a question wrong during practice or testing. And if you do that, it kind of kills the identity that you're always going to get things right. And that's not good, because if we kill this identity before a test or exam, that's going to create a lot of pressure and it might bring us bad luck. Had we not practiced these things and not gotten them wrong, we could still maintain this belief and this idea and this confidence that we're going to wreck the test or exam. But the problem is, if you don't get things wrong during practice because you didn't practice, the exam is going to make up for your practice. And the things you would have gotten wrong and learned from in practice, you're going to get them wrong in the exam or test, where everything counts. And like basically like your grade point average or like your report mark, your subject average, like where those marks are going to reflect that. But that's just talking about like the consequence. Like what we're talking about is just slow academic progress, because you get less reps. You get less repetitions where you answer questions, get them wrong, and understand why you get them wrong. And that slows down your academic progression. But also more personally, I also realized that just trying to be someone who is right all the time just makes conversations with other people a bit difficult. It goes back to what I said here earlier about all it takes is just one person on a random Wednesday afternoon during break just saying, hey, you're wrong about this, and them having a good reason to call you out on being wrong. And then you just react like I did. You just argue back, but you don't argue with respect. You low-key shout at them. You low-key get angry, like how I'm angry right now that I have to redo 22 minutes of the script all over again because my audio was horrid. But you get what I'm saying. It makes conversations with other people pretty tough because you're not going to listen to the other person's points to understand them and to actually have a meaningful conversation. You're just going to care about listening to their points to figure out how you're going to counteract them and how you're going to rebut them. And I'm going to give you guys a word of advice from my own personal experience. Rebuttals are awesome when you're doing debating. Like if you're in a debate team and you're in a debate match and you want to rebut your opponent, just do that. Like this is a peak strategy. This is a meta strategy. But in an actual conversation where there's no debating trophy or medal to be won, this just makes it very hard to have conversations with you, and it just makes it hard to have conversations with other people. And it just makes it difficult to connect. And then the next thing, just to reiterate the point we made in number 2, you just become hard to develop. The thing is, if you think that you're right 90% of the time, you only have 10% of development in you, because to develop, you need to admit and you need to understand that you are wrong in some places, or that you have a deficit in something. And to have a deficit in something usually means that there are some things you need to work on. And if you don't believe that you have things to work on, you'll never work on them. And that definitely does make it a bit tough for you to develop. One lesson that I learned from this, and I actually got heavy consequences for it, is because it limited the amount of degree programs that I was able to go for in university. So actually just like make sure you don't repeat this mistake. I thought I was reasonably good at mathematics, and for my school, yeah, I was a top performer. But let's not think about that. Let's just think about the fact that I thought I was really good in mathematics, and then I thought, okay, number patterns, I can do that. Question one, I can do that. High order questions in question one and two, which is number patterns as well, I can do that. Analytical geometry, I can do that. I thought I was good at those things, but I never practiced those things. I hardly ever practiced them beyond a certain point. And the problem was when they popped up in the exam, I got a rude awakening because I realized that, hey, maybe I'm not so good at analytical geometry and number patterns as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not so good at functions as I thought I was. Now, this is all well and good to see when you're practicing, but the problem is I saw this during my final exam, and I was having this realization during my final mathematics exam. So, needless to say, it didn't go as planned. I still ended up being in a decent program, but guys, just take my word of advice in that sense. Again, with a grain of salt, but take it. Just, how do I put it? Just admit that you're wrong a lot more often, or just be willing to admit that you're wrong a lot more often, so you get more room to develop. Because when we do that, we can get into how we can enable learning. One big thing we can do is we can just detach being right from the value of our identity. Now, I'll admit, it won't be easy. It wasn't easy for me. It still isn't easy for me, especially when you have the good point to say that being wrong can and does have consequences, like a repeating theme. If you're wrong too many times for a test, you fail the test, and that gets more painful than like emotional pain. That's emotional pain on top of real world consequences. However, I feel like those real world consequences would be easier to digest if you did not have this emotional pain of attaching your identity to being right. So if you detach being right from the value of your identity, if you don't need to be right all the time to prove that you're a worthy human being, which is, I think, the definitive truth, then it just makes it a lot easier for you to approach being wrong, if that makes sense. And also, in the long run, it means that you no longer have to have being correct, which is something that can be very volatile. You don't have to attach that to your confidence. And a weird thing, which this one is more personal, and it's also just a weird point to move into. I can't really smoothly move into this point, so we're just going to say it. You might still hate being wrong, so you got to use that to fuel your learning. If you get something wrong and it rubs you the wrong way, use that as fuel to find the answer for why you got something wrong, so you can make sure that it's never going to happen again. The best part is, now that even if you still feel a bit awkward and off about being wrong about something, you can use that to fuel your learning efforts to make sure you're not wrong about that thing ever again, or at least not in the same way. If that is something that happens, at least there's a positive spin to doing that, because I do that now. A lot of the time, I take my study sessions very seriously, even though they're not for marks. Like, if I get things wrong during my study sessions, I'll actually get mad at myself and I'll like actually hit my table. If I get an integration sum incorrect, I'll just smash the table with my fist, and it forces me to admit that I got it wrong. And because I don't want to get it wrong again, I'll just look at the answer and just make sure I can actually do the answer myself. And I just repeat this process. Would I say that it has helped my academic performance? Yeah, I think it has. And then we move on to the next one. Another way to help our academic performance is just reward ourselves, whether we get something right or wrong, especially if we're taking part in intentional practice. Because at the end of the day, remember when we talked about how we can enable learning earlier, or not enable learning, but like the consequences of right maxing being you become hard to develop. Development needs a few things. Development needs you to recognize that you need something to develop and that you lack in something, but it also needs effort and it needs hard work. And especially when we get effort and hard work consistently, we create long-term development. But now, long-term development is very boring and it's very humbling. And humbling the ego a lot is just a very like tiring thing to do. One way we can encourage ourselves to humble the ego and encourage ourselves to go through the hard grind of development is just to reward ourselves for it, whether we get something right or wrong. And especially earlier this year, and even now, I always try to reward myself for my study sessions. If I spend like an hour or 2 hours studying something I'm supposed to study with focus, or even 30 minutes, even if it's just 30 minutes studying something I'm supposed to study with focus, I tell myself, yeah, I've earned myself a few games of Rocket League. I've earned myself the right to watch YouTube without feeling guilty or stressed. So when we start rewarding ourselves for just putting in effort and hard work, again, we detach the value of our identity from always being right. On that, we can move on to the secret sauce, because I think, I like you guys as viewers because you guys are attentive. Even if you might not be just watching the video directly, maybe you're listening to this while washing dishes or eating food or making your food. In that case, let me know, like, what are you doing in the background, or what are you doing while I'm in the background? But I know you guys noticed the thumbnail and you saw 3 different bars. You saw one about being right, one about learning, and one was question marks. We're going to move to the question marks. And I'm going to do this quickly because I need to go to bed and actually study for my C# exam, which is due in like 4 days. Anyways, we need to be open to being proven wrong, regardless of the source. Now, this one is also like coming from a personal place for me, in the sense that the way I used to view people in high school, which is super unhealthy, and I suggest you guys not do this as well. It's not really great for the long run. I used to view and like rank people inherently based off, okay, this group of people are the academics. These are my competition for top spot in the school. This group of people are not the academics, and they don't really focus in class and pay attention in class too much, and I wouldn't really trust them to solve a simultaneous equation. So in my head, I would tell myself that I would never ever lose an argument or lose a discussion or be caught off guard in an intellectual discussion with people who aren't focusing in school. But the problem is this is completely false, because whether or not a point is a good point is not dependent on the status of a person or what you believe that person's status is. And that's also something just very important. It's a bit of a side note and a bit of something like a tangent. Guys, every human being has value. Everyone has value, and it's not really a good idea to look down on people just because you're better at doing standardized tests than them. So just make sure you avoid that. Please avoid doing that. Because then you walk into the trap that I walked into, where if I was having conversations with specific people, I would just never believe that they could ever prove me wrong. And it would create this issue where these people would actually bring up good points and valuable points for my life, but I would just disregard them because they just came from people that I wouldn't believe or trust. Now, the thing is with this piece of advice is that there are situations where it's not even about status and all of that. Sometimes people will genuinely give you bad advice, and you can tell that this advice is very harmful or destructive to your life and that it's very, very wrong. And in cases like that, when you can denote and deduce, I don't know why I said denote, where you can deduce that the advice is wrong, I think it's reasonable to just disregard that advice, or at least just find someone else that you trust or a more reliable source. I suggest you guys just think about that and do that with some of my videos, because again, like, I'm a really young person, guys. I'm under 30 and I'm just making videos on the internet. I'm really just doing this so that like I have something to do to procrastinate and just excuse myself to say at least it's more productive than just sitting around and just watching someone make NBA videos for like 5 hours a day. But that's just the point I'm trying to make when we get back to the video, is just that some lessons can come from the most unexpected of sources. So you have to respect that, and you just have to do your best to understand what people are saying or understand what that source is saying, because genuinely it could be the source you need to level up your knowledge. And also a big thing that we need to do is just double check our beliefs and flaws whenever we can. For me, I found that this allowed me to not feel so offended when people brought up my flaws and when people brought up flaws in thinking, because maybe 3 days ago I thought about, oh, I believed that pineapple should be on pizza. But then I realized maybe it's not a good idea for pineapple to be on pizza, because the idea of having pineapple chunks drenched in cheese is just not that appealing to a lot of people, and it just seems weird. So now when someone brings that up in conversation, I'm not going to be so offended or feel like I'm being attacked as easily, and I can be like, oh yeah, that's a good point, and I've even thought about that myself, and then we can continue the conversation from there. And then the final thing, so that I can also go to bed and end this procrastination session. Being right isn't always the number one objective in life. This one's a bit weird, and I say this again with limited scope. Maybe like my opinion on this will change as I grow up. I think as do a lot of opinions of mine have changed and continue to change as I grow up. But this one just comes from a place where I've had a lot of, I want to say, arguments and discussions with family members. And one thing I've noticed is that these discussions always reach a point of stalemate, or a point where we're no longer talking to each other, but we're talking at each other, because now it just becomes a point where someone says something, I try to rebut it, and then I'll say, oh, or actually, let me just redo it like this. I'll say something. I'll tell someone that, hey, I think pineapple should be on pizza. And then they'll tell me, no, that's weird. Like, fruits and melted cheese is weird. And then I tell them, no, but I think pineapple should be on pizza because they're both edible at the end of the day. And then they're going to answer with saying, no, but like fruit with melted cheese on bread, just a weird combination. And then in my head, to that response, I'm going to be thinking, but like, you're just not responding to what I'm saying. That's a bad response to my point. You're just disregarding my point. It goes back to the thing I said. I think it was around, where was it? Oh yeah, here. This idea here, when I said around here, talking about how you might treat conversations like actual debate matches. That works really well if you want a debate trophy. And if you guys are doing debating and you want trophies and medals in debating, then do that. That's perfectly fine in that domain. But in the real world, where there's nuance and there's just differences in how people think, sometimes we're just forced to think about what we value more, whether or not we value being correct, or we value the strength and the health of a relationship. And a lot of the time I realized that when I was locked into loops like that, I just prefer to just value the relationship over being right. Now, to close off, I will say, much like what I was saying on this point that I'm highlighting right now, there is nuance to this. There could, again, genuinely be cases where people are giving you horrible advice, or they're saying something that's completely incorrect and you can reasonably prove that it's incorrect. In that case, especially if this thing harms your value, like it's like you and your friend, like your friend like comes up to you and you're an introvert, you don't like parties, and your friend is like, hey, let's go to a party on the other side of town. This person, my friend, says he's going to like give everyone like blue cake for free, and this blue cake like gives you like plus 200% energy, and it makes us run around, and it can make us jump really high and all of that. And you will tell yourself, or like you being an introvert, you'll be like, no, I don't want to go to the party, and I don't want to go to the party because I think that this is just an unsafe situation. What do you mean we're going to the other side of town, and this part of town is sketchy and all of that? You're reasonably correct in that situation. And while it's arguable to say that you saying no to going to that party might cause friction between you and your friend, if you need to go to a party to the other side of town and put your values and put your own health and safety on the line to keep a friend, then 8 times out of 10 that friend is not worth keeping. So for situations like that, I think it's reasonable and understandable. And I think it just falls back to like a pattern that we're going to see with all of my videos, and I think any video online, is that we're going to do our best to give solutions to specific problems and think about alternative avenues and think about possibilities as to how our advice might apply to people's lives. But everyone's life is just so uniquely different. There's 8 billion people on the planet and billions of different possibilities of ways that lives can be lived, and different situations that need specific situations and specific solutions. The best I can do is just give you some type of framework that worked for my life and my kind of situation and circumstance. So for any person who is going through something similar, you have things to take away to basically help you out in that area. But in reality, you're still gonna need to just take everything I said, take everything that's going on in your life, and also just thinking about what would actually be good for the situation you're in right now. And that's a pretty tough bit of thinking to do. It's not easy, but to get the best possible solution for your life, you need to find a solution tailor-made for your life. So while I wish I could give you guys perfect advice, if I could give everyone perfect advice, I would actually sell that and be a millionaire. But we don't live in a perfect world. The best I can do is just give you this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope to see you guys for the next video. If you're binge watching my content in like 2029 or something, maybe by then I'll have like 1,000 views or something. I hope I'm still making content by that time, and I guess I'll see you in the next video you're going to binge, whichever one YouTube suggests for you guys. But yeah, until then, have a good one, guys. Peace out.